The big picture concern, too, is do we really want to come out of this pandemic having eroded a lot of our fundamental rights, freedoms, and elements of privacy?
We should counteract actively the myth that there is some issues with these vaccines. It's not true. It's probably the best vaccines we've ever had in the history of humanity, full stop. That's the truth.
You were going to create a surveillance system by having these vaccine passports to get into concerts or basketball games or, whatever. People will be able to track everything you are doing, where you've been and when. This will be a system of surveillance like no other.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Libby Znaimer.
Welcome to the Zoomer. There's always been a delicate balance between the right to privacy and the right to know. This has never been more true than in the midst of this pandemic. And when it comes to the places where we should feel the most protected, our rights are limited. In hospitals, nursing homes, and home care, workers are not required to be vaccinated or to disclose whether or not they are. Today, we're going to look at the ethical and legal dilemmas unfolding in the wake of COVID-19. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
More than 1 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered worldwide, equal to 14 doses for every 100 people. In Canada, over 13 million doses have been given, with older adults and frontline workers taking priority. But there's a minority who've opted not to get the jab, whether due to vaccine hesitancy or outright opposition. In a new survey, 12% of Canadian respondents said they would not get the vaccine at all. Even among health workers, a small percentage continues to refuse the vaccine. It's prompted some employers to seek legal advice on whether they can ask staff to disclose their vaccination status, pitting privacy rights against public health concerns.
So the first question is whether or not people in certain fields, especially healthcare, should be required to have the vaccine. Kerry, let's start with you.
It would be wonderful if they were required to have the vaccine, but it's a very, very difficult thing to do. As much as we respect the autonomy and free will of our patients, legally and ethically, that does extend to healthcare workers as well. And it becomes very difficult to absolutely categorically insist upon this. It's a tough one. But look, I find myself, as you said in your intro, I find myself rethinking a lot of things since this pandemic has begun. And when I look to the situation, particularly in long-term care, it becomes very difficult and very concerning for the well-being of the residents.
Doris?
What a phenomenal question, Libby. And I wish we had asked the same question about do we require governments to do the right thing? Here you go, right? So I think that we need to encourage, we need to absolutely help health professionals understand that being vaccinated is number one, good for any one of us to protect ourselves, to protect our families, to protect our communities, and yes, to protect patients. So are we doing that? Yes, we are doing that, absolutely. Are the great majority of nurses, and I would say doctors and others, getting vaccinated? Yes.
Dr. Jüni, what's the problem with just making it a requirement?
The point here is right now that the rules need to be looked at differently since we're in the middle of an outbreak. We will continue to be in a wobbly situation until 2022. And in what we know, just from discussions that happen, at different levels is that this transition phase from a pandemic into an endemic situation will need to be looked at differently than before. This means there might be more requirements in this transition phase than once we achieved the situation that we have had, during the last 20 years for influenza. It's different. Let's remember, even for influenza, we had a mask or vaccinate campaign. So if we're now in an outbreak situation, we just need to be open to, disclose more information than regularly, and potentially in certain situations also to require that people get vaccinated.
Kelly.
I mean, from the employer's perspective, just to your question about why we can't just mandate it across the board, one concern that employers will have is human rights issues. So some people won't be able to get vaccinated for health reasons, potentially, or for firmly held religious beliefs, and employers can't discriminate against employees on the basis of protected grounds under human rights legislation. So obviously that's going to be a persistent issue that has to be considered by employers as to how or whether such employees can be accommodated. And there may be workplaces where there aren't accommodations that can be made for those people. But in other circumstances, there are accommodations that can be made in terms of, continuing to wear PPE, depending on what the employee's job is within the institution.
These vaccines are so different from the traditional vaccines that we've seen over the years. Vaccines usually take a number of years to develop, to test, to ensure proper use, etc. These vaccines have been produced in a matter of months. The measures are completely different. If you take a look at the history of them, they're completely different. People have allergic reactions to vaccines, some people. So I don't think you can impose this requirement on people across the board. I would really object to that.
Bill?
We talked to CARP members when we knew we were going to be discussing this today, and many were really shocked and surprised that their loved ones who were living, especially in congregate settings, that there were no rules that everybody had to be vaccinated. And they thought that would just be the assurance they would have. So what they said to us was, surely there's some way to make sure at least all those people coming in the facility are going to be safe for our loved ones. But it created a real concern. People don't know this is happening.
We need to take a short break. There's more when we return.
And when a person is not vaccinated, there is the capacity of the employer to demand that they use PPE.
Welcome back. Right now, no one, including healthcare workers, is required to take the vaccine. Not only that, there's also no requirement to disclose whether a person has been vaccinated. That applies to people who come into your home, like personal support workers and physiotherapists or chiropractors who come into close contact with you. So is that the same problematic issue, Anne?
There are so many issues in this area. Relating to personal care, relating to one's privacy. As I always said, it can't be privacy versus something else. It can't be privacy versus public health or other things. It has to be privacy, and we can deliver multiple positive gains, but you cannot impose this on people.
Doris, I would have thought that healthcare workers would certainly want to give information that will make their patients feel more comfortable, but why shouldn't they be required to even disclose?
There is always, and it has been always been, the possibility of disclosing. And when a person is not vaccinated, there is the capacity of the employer to demand that they use PPE. And we have used it before. We have used it even in situations like the flu. At the end of the day, we need to protect professionals, but we also need to protect our patients. So will RNO support the healthcare professional, nurses, physios, others disclosing? And then if for whatever reason you decide that you don't get the vaccine, which we hope is not the case, because vaccines, with all due respect, were not fast forwarded. They're all approved by Health Canada in this country. They're safe. People have been working for many, many decades in components of it. So if you don't want to take a vaccine, the employer has a right to actually say you need to use PPE, and we would support that.
I mean, there's legal and ethical reasons why we have these safeguards. And as much as we respect, but by adhering to the fact that we don't have to disclose as healthcare workers, it's really part of our respect for patients as well. And I really don't think we can compromise something like that. I don't see any easy way around it. PPE, absolutely. And that may be one of the solutions in future.
Dr. Jüni, what do you think?
Well, two things. One that I wanted to really re-emphasize is there was absolutely no shortcuts that were made when these vaccines were developed. And remember, the winners we have now, and that's right now Pfizer and Moderna, are just the top two out of many, many vaccines. We're having probably around 90 that are in different phases. That's the top two. They have been established to be safe and very effective. And the others following actually as well. So we need to take this into account. We should counteract actively the myth that there is some issues with these vaccines. It's not true. It's probably the best vaccines we've ever had in the history of humanity, full stop. That's the truth. Now, the other part is we probably need to give people different options. One option is indeed that you get vaccinated, you document it, and you show this, in specific situations, like in long-term care homes or in hospitals, etc., and perhaps also in other situations. And then there's the alternative, and the alternative obviously right now is indeed PPE, including masking. And you probably will need these two options, and you will need in certain situations also just, the possibility to opt out of, being vaccinated for very specific reasons. But the point is, even if you opt out of being vaccinated also for medical reasons, this means you can still wear PPE. We need to protect people in this situation. We're in an outbreak situation, and this continues to be a potential outbreak situation at least for another year.
Right, but right now people can say, I don't have to tell you. Anne?
I'm not suggesting that people just conceal information. Truly, I'm not. I think you have to respect people who feel they cannot get the vaccine, do not want to get the vaccine. And I think then they need to be able to express that. So I think there has to be some understanding that in many public places, there will be an expectation that you will have a vaccine. And if you don't, there will be ramifications to that, no question, in terms of wearing PPE, et cetera. What I object to is the imposing the view that this is going to become a must, that you must have a vaccine, and under no conditions you can't have a vaccine. I understand that this will be a requirement if you need to travel, for example, or just a myriad number of factors. But at this point, I think people have to understand that they will have to reveal whether they've obtained a vaccine or not.
But they don't have to, is my point.
You know what it is, Libby? It's not that they have to by law, legislated, but the pressure on individuals to reveal that is enormous. You go into a workplace, you go into a long-term care facility, anywhere. People are asking. It's like the first question everyone seems to be asking. So you're right, it's not legislated, it's not a requirement in terms of law, but the pressure on individuals to reveal this is enormous.
They can still say, I don't have to tell you.
Oh, they can say that, but by implication, when you say that, the inference is that you haven't gotten the vaccine. Because if you've gotten the vaccine, you're not going to say that.
When we come back, the responsibility of long-term care facilities when it comes to protecting their residents. That's next.
The population of PSWs includes a lot of people who are very vulnerable, also economically very vulnerable, who have a migration background.
Welcome back. The vulnerable elderly in long-term care suffered the most throughout the pandemic, but still, there's no requirement for workers there to be vaccinated. In England, for instance, Care UK, a large nursing home operator, has introduced a no jab, no job policy for staff. Other private companies are considering doing the same, and the government is looking into applying that to the entire sector. But here, there are no plans to do this. I recently spoke with Donna Duncan, CEO of the Ontario Long-Term Care Association, on my show, Fight Back. Take a listen. Do your employees even have to disclose whether or not they're vaccinated?
That's a great question. We certainly have to ask them, and we certainly rely on them to be truthful and honest as we try to track what their vaccination rates are. It's really important that we know and that everybody be completely honest. We're relying on their word, but obviously, if we can do the vaccines in the home, we will have a clear line of sight as to who's been vaccinated and who hasn't.
Right, but some of the reason it's not just a matter of whether they can get there. It's vaccine hesitancy. A lot of them don't want it.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of work to deal with that. We're seeing in many cases it's not clear refusal. In many cases it's access to vaccines. In many cases we're hearing, especially in rural and more remote communities, it's travel to the vaccine. That's why we keep asking and appealing to the government to have in-home vaccine clinics. We know how successful those were in the city of Toronto back in December and January, where you can have those one-on-one discussions where people can see their colleagues getting vaccinated. We believe that by bringing vaccines into the home, that will increase our rates and will help advance these new visiting protocols in all of our homes.
So you heard Donna Duncan of the Ontario Long-Term Care Association saying that workers in long-term care homes don't even have to tell their bosses necessarily whether or not they're vaccinated. Kerry, is that good enough?
When it comes to staff within long-term care homes, it's a very different demographic profile than most healthcare workers within our hospitals. You're dealing in many cases with much more marginalized people, racialized people, very often, but not exclusively women. So you're dealing with a lot of much more complex factors that I really do think have to be considered. Look, I see this as a huge problem. And I've spent a lot of time in medical education with both PSWs and healthcare workers, and there really is a significantly different profile. I think a lot of effort needs to go in, and it will, into supporting these people. But I would also say we cannot be in a situation where people are tucked away in their room week after week, month after month, because they can't come out because that is their home, because staff have not been vaccinated. It's going to be tough. I don't think we can force it. I don't know how things roll in Britain in relation to that, but I think when you look at the context of this, I can't imagine how we can simply force it.
Some of those restrictions have been eased, but the thresholds that Donna told me about, gave me concern. They said that in a home where 85% of the residents and 70% of the workers have been vaccinated, they're going to start doing communal activities. Doris, what do you think of that?
I think that we need to build on understanding the histories of these PSWs. We need to understand their living conditions, and we need to bring vaccines to the homes and educate the healthcare workers, PSWs in particular, and all others on why vaccine actually is good for them to save their lives, their families' lives, because of the conditions in which they are obliged to live because of minimum wage, and also their residents. PSWs and all of other providers, RNs, RPNs, and Ps, are very caring people. They don't want to damage their residents.
Kelly, what's the problem with no jab, no job?
Well, I mean, to some degree, the contract is the problem. Absent a government mandate requiring employers to require their employees to be vaccinated, it can be hard for employers, even in the context of a retirement home or long-term care facility, to require their employees to get vaccinated, because the employment contracts or collective agreements in place at the workplace may be an impediment to that and may prevent the employer from implementing that kind of policy. And it can also give rise to, in the non-unionized environment, other legal risks related to potentially wrongful dismissal, depending on the circumstances. So it can be an expensive policy to have, and certainly a time-consuming one to have to deal with.
I don't know how you can make it a requirement absent it being in your contract if you're an employee of a long-term care facility. As was just noted, it's unlikely that this kind of requirement would be contained in one's contract. So I think imposing it as a requirement, I don't know if legally that would be possible.
Right. I mean, you know, people were talking about the vulnerabilities and the conditions for personal support workers in long-term care. I think a lot of them don't even have contracts. They're part-time workers. Bill, though?
Yeah, you know, Libby, vulnerable older Canadians, their families really don't understand. They say to us, look, if I work in construction or if I work in industry, there are safety rules I have to follow. And if I don't follow, I'll get disciplined or I'll get fired. Why isn't this exactly the same thing? Even in New Brunswick, one province there, they've said to their long-term healthcare workers, they've said, yes, you can say no, but that means we can say no to your job too. And they have been very firm about it. And we don't understand why, in this very special case, this can't happen all across the country.
I'm wondering if one of the issues isn't the shortage of long-term care workers, and if that's a factor. Dr. Jüni, do you have a view?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's important to acknowledge that the population of PSWs includes a lot of people who are very vulnerable, also economically very vulnerable, who have a migration background, as I have, for example, but without the privileges I have, that they are struggling also with the language, etc. And we need to acknowledge all that. We need to encourage the vaccination. We need to bring the vaccines to people and not people to the vaccines. If it's inevitable that we need to bring people to vaccines, we need to pay people to get vaccinated for the hours they miss at work. Because many people, many PSWs actually just live from paycheck to paycheck, and that's another issue.
We need to take a short break. There's more when we return.
Mandatory vaccination policies, as most people understand them, are going to be a pretty hard sell, but there's all sorts of other creative solutions you can do.
Welcome back. So for the wider populations, vaccines are finally getting into arms and Canadians will be returning to work. How far can employers go in demanding vaccinations? What are employees' rights? And what are the rights and responsibilities of the employer? Let's start with Kelly. You mentioned a contract before. So can a private employer require in the contract that people have to be vaccinated if they want to come back to the workplace?
That's the $1 million question that we're getting asked right now: is can we have a mandatory vaccine policy? Can we require them full stop? And obviously, literally speaking, you can't require anyone to get a needle in the arm. So the question is really whether, what you can do with that employee if they don't get vaccinated, or what you can do to encourage them to get vaccinated. And I would say there's a range of things you can do short of requiring it of all workers. That you can certainly encourage it, you can provide incentives, but the mandatory get vaccinated or we'll fire you, I think is going to be a pretty difficult policy to enforce, and certainly one that comes with a lot of legal risk.
So is that a wrongful dismissal if an employer does that?
It would depend on the circumstances and the reason for the employer wanting to impose the vaccinations policy. Obviously, what might be reasonable in one work environment wouldn't be in another. Similarly, if it's unionized, you're going to have different restrictions than you would in a non-unionized environment. It remains to be seen, but I think that the consensus that I'm hearing is that mandatory vaccination policies, as most people understand them, are going to be a pretty hard sell. But there's all sorts of other creative solutions you can do stopping short of mandatory vaccines.
And what about employee rights? I mean, if I want to know if people are coming back to the workplace, if the person sitting in the cubicle next to me is vaccinated, don't employees have the right to make sure that they are safe?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't believe that you have a right to ask people medical questions relating to whether you've had a vaccine or not.
Kerry, I mean, I'll take our company as an example. So normally, this show would be happening with a live audience of mostly older people, and all of you would be sitting around the table here with me. Would it be unreasonable to require vaccinations for somebody to either be in the audience or to be working?
It is medical, it's healthcare information. I don't think we can ask that of someone else. A lot of people are going to casually come up with this in conversation, but I don't think we can. And, from an ethical point of view, the big picture concern too is, do we really want to come out of this pandemic having eroded a lot of our fundamental rights, freedoms, and elements of privacy? Because there actually has been a lot of that. So, the implications of something like that being mandated are also very significant for the broader society.
I think we need to be very careful that we don't extrapolate from pre-pandemic times to what's happening in the transition phase until we make it into 2023. This is a transition that requires a lot of sacrifice from all of us to keep this place safe, and every place, worldwide safe. And the sacrifice includes also disclosure of some elements that typically would be considered private. Remember, it's an outbreak situation. In an outbreak situation, the legal and the ethical elements are slightly different. I'm completely with you if it comes to, what's happening once this thing has become endemic in 2023. We're, okay, we know how it behaves. We survived another winter and all will be fine. But right now, you can't compromise everywhere and just think you can go back also privacy-wisely to where we were. That's a recipe for disaster.
So does that hold water? I mean, we have all kinds of emergency orders that would never hold up in regular times. So is this another aspect of the emergency where we have to sacrifice some of our rights, Anne?
Personally, I have a problem with it. I understand that there are, under emergencies, additional measures can be taken which would normally not be taken. All privacy laws all around the world have emergency measures that can be invoked that would never normally be invoked because they would be an invasion of privacy. So I do understand that, but what we have to make sure is that those measures have to be limited in terms of time and scope. If you invoke an emergency measure, it has to be for a finite period of time, for a finite purpose, and then it has to end, full stop, afterwards.
Exactly. That's really important that we understand that this is temporary for an emergency in an outbreak situation. It needs to be limited, and we need to require these limits upfront.
These measures are invoked under emergency measures, and the expectation is that they will end at the end of the emergency. Many times they're not. They continue on after the emergency, the pandemic, the terrorist incident, whatever, has completely ended. That's why we have to be extremely careful to have very finite end periods.
I don't think that the public at large will not understand that this is temporary for a transition, from a transition between a pandemic and an endemic, and not moving back to a pandemic if we are not careful. I think the public will understand. And I think that especially in large work in places and closed workplaces, warehouses, etc., the issue of there is the right to the vaccine, and we give all the education, all the explanations, bring the vaccine on site, give sick pay days if people cannot get the vaccine on site. Really, we do it the way that we were supposed to do it from day one, which we didn't. And then if you still do not want, for whatever reason, to take the vaccine, PPE, because you cannot endanger the great majority for a few.
Dr. Bowman, does this use of an emergency
what worries me, Libby, with the kind of emergency provision is there really, and historically it's true, you can have a lot of ethical erosion and regression in these states of emergencies that you don't recover from. And people say, and I'm going to be a little philosophical, but if your ethics and values are completely situational, are they really foundational at all? You know, if you live as a society by certain fundamental values and you say, well, not today, not under these circumstances, are those values really solid and secure? So the state, the government, all of us, you know, we run the risk when we, an exception here, an exception there, that we're really eroding a moral platform that we live by in this country as well. So I think we have to be very careful in this area.
Yeah, but don't we have to be careful that we don't end up like some of those anti-maskers who's saying you're taking away my freedom because you're making me wear a mask, or I can't have 200 people at a church service, or all of that. I mean, most of us understand and accept a lot of measures, a lot of curtailing of our freedom. You know, we can't hug our kids.
Accepted that. We've willingly accepted that. But when we start saying, you know, we're going to make legislative changes, you know, the legislation's a reflection of the values of the society. So I think we have to be very careful. I'm actually very impressed with the moral progress that most Canadians have made. You know, the commitment to this has been astounding. I think we've grown a lot in this, actually. But I think it has to be protected.
What we're talking about here is that accepting an extremely safe and effective vaccine and also accepting PPE in certain situations is fundamentally an altruistic act. And where I start to be challenged actually is when you then just basically indicate that we should reward non-altruism in this situation even. You know, I think it's, as long as we're aware of, this is a transitional period until we have survived these entire implications of the pandemic for a year or 18 months or so. And as long as we have clear-cut end dates, I don't see that our ethics would erode if we actually just openly discuss what is needed here to keep this under control and to minimize suffering and to optimize the way we open up. You know, imagine if we start to have merrily cinemas open and everybody just floods into these cinemas, 50% of people are not vaccinated and we generate the next outbreak. Hallelujah.
Well, you know what? It's really interesting. I just saw a new survey on these very subjects and people were asked things like, when will you be comfortable going to a movie theater or a concert, and a whole raft of other things. And a lot of the answers were well out into 2023. So, you know, even if everything is open and no one has to disclose, I don't know if people are ready. I mean, I think this idea of a transition kind of works both ways.
Well, you know, in Canada, we're a little different than our neighbors to the south, and the needs of the collective has always been advanced over the rights of the individual. And the collective that we're concerned about is the elder Canadians who are in long-term care, who need to be protected, and others like them. We need laws now that make sure that those people who are working with our elders in long-term care and other situations, that they are able to know and be protected. Otherwise, they are not only going to be at risk physically, but they're going to be anxious, they're going to be afraid, and we're going to create a situation never intended by some kind of ethics discussion.
When we come back, vaccine passports. Would you carry one? Stay with us.
You know, really, we live in a free and open society. And yes, we make choices. That's the whole point. Do you want to curtail that? You want to restrict people's activities?
Welcome back. The only way to know for sure if a person has been vaccinated is with the appropriate documentation, which brings us to the question of vaccine passports. Some say it's an easy way to show that you're safe and satisfy any gatekeepers you encounter. Others say it's just a different kind of carding and can be used to discriminate and intimidate. And whether Canada requires them or not, it is certain they will be required for some international travel. In some places, like Israel, they already are. So, Anne Cavoukian.
So just to be clear, I do not like vaccine passports. I'm opposed to them. They will create a, as has been said, a caste system and a spying apparatus like anything anything else. So surveillance will abound. Having said that, if you intend to travel anywhere, you want to get on a plane, you're going to need a vaccine passport. There's no question. So for that reason, I've been working with Identity 2020 on something called the Good Health Pass. And what this is, it is a vaccine passport that is as privacy protective as you can get. The information is totally decentralized and resides with the individual and under their control. And when they go to the airport, for example, to go on a plane, they can reveal it at their choice to the gate attendant or whoever, so they can see that, yes, a vaccine has been obtained as is required, but they will not be able to retain that information. It won't be used for surveillance purposes. There will be a number of protections that will protect the privacy and security of the information.
Kerry, Bowman, what do you think? I mean, I was under the impression that a lot of these vaccine passports, the only information they have is whether you've been vaccinated.
Yeah, they're almost certainly going to have which vaccine you've had. I would imagine they'll have your age, et cetera. My concern for the approaching summer of 2021 is that who will be able to travel? I work internationally myself. Who will be able to move around this planet of ours freely? People from wealthy countries, low-income countries have no opportunity to travel for probably an extended period of time.
What about requiring a vaccine passport of some sort for a concert or some other type of event?
The reality is, it's not a must to go to a concert. It's not a must to travel. And it's not a must to go to, to see a basketball game. It's a choice. So to put large groups at risk because you want to have your individual choice of not showing that you got the vaccine, that's the other side of the coin. It's not a must to go to these places. So people have a choice. They don't want to give proof of vaccination. They can choose to watch it in television. The reality is not only because of other countries, it's because the risk that we put our own country, the lives of vulnerable communities, not only the aged, but actually other vulnerable communities, the so-called now hotspots. And the reality is that we need to care for also the economy. So it's both, it's the lives of people and it's the economy.
Really, we live in a free and open society. And yes, we make choices. That's the whole point. You want to curtail that? You want to restrict people's activities and you can't leave the house unless these conditions are met? I'm sorry, I totally reject that. Of course, we need to engage in certain protections and travel. We won't have any choice. But you're going to create a surveillance system by having these vaccine passports to get into concerts or basketball games or whatever. People will be able to track everything you are doing, where you've been and when. This will be a system of surveillance like no other. Let me remind you, contact tracing, when this first came out, 300 of the world's leading epidemiologists and doctors in 26 countries wrote to the governments of all the countries around the globe, and they said, do not enable surveillance to take place through this contact tracing. You will completely be unsuccessful and you will reject the freedoms that we have enjoyed thus far. 300 of the world's leading epidemiologists, 26 countries. This is not just a concern for a few people. We have to preserve our freedom and have protections, but it can't be one versus the other.
Well, then the freedom of choices, I go back to Libby's question about the anti-maskers and the nurses and doctors and others that we had on those events that put huge numbers of people at risk, and people that had no desire to pay the price ended up paying the price. We are talking here about the transition. I want to go back to the issue of 2023, 2024, even 2023 for sure, of how we are going to reopen things in a way that is safe for the great majority and we don't end up in a worse place than where we are already.
When we come back, we'll hear some final thoughts from our panelists. Welcome back. With only a few minutes left, panelists, please leave us with some final thoughts. We'll start with Anne.
Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. If you want to live in a free and open society, we have to preserve our privacy. This pandemic is terrible. We have to protect ourselves during the pandemic. There's no question, but it's going to end. What we have to ensure is that our privacy and our freedom doesn't end at that time.
Kerry.
Quite similar, actually. Yes, we're in in an emergency state. I actually think most of us have learned a lot ethically on this front, but we need to protect our freedom, and we need to take these kinds of questions very carefully. When it comes to vaccine passports, I'll just say briefly, big difference between domestic and international. I see domestic as a huge risk in terms of surveillance and very problematic.
Doris.
I absolutely agree. We need to protect our freedoms. I think we need to also protect the collective. There will be a transition period between now and reopening society and the economy. And while it's not passports, there probably will be some type of proof to get to large places like a concert, like a stadium, and like travel. And doing it only to travel, it means we are privileging only some and not the others, quite frankly.
Bill?
We're mainly concerned about the safety of our older, vulnerable Canadians who we need to make sure don't suffer the devastation at the end of the COVID pandemic that it did at the beginning. And whatever it takes at this point, short term, is what's needed now. Canadians wanted to know their most vulnerable population is protected. Let's make sure that happens.
Kelly.
I think vaccine disclosure and mandatory vaccinations are going to continue to be a thorny issue for employers there for the next little while, in the next few years, certainly. There's a constant need on the part of employers to balance business needs and health and safety with employees' other rights, including the right to privacy, as Anne has mentioned, and their human rights as well. And I think vaccination opinions and policies in workplaces is going to have to evolve over time as the situation continues to develop.
Peter.
After the current third wave, we will be in a transition period which will last at least 18 months. For these 18 months, we still need to make sacrifices, and this includes compromises if it comes to vaccine passports, etc. And I think we need to live with it. We need to acknowledge the scope for abuse. Therefore, we need to address that part, but it's inevitable.
Our governments are facing tough decisions as they weigh individual rights against the public good. They'll also need a dose of courage to get the balance right. Thank you to my panelists for being here, and for you at home watching. We'll see you next time. It's time to zoom out.